Great. Okay, so my name is Katie Wilkinson and I'm the Wild Communities team leader. Hello if I've met you before, and hello if I haven't met you before. So this evening we're going to be looking at top tips for forming a community group. And we're joined tonight by Gareth from Iridescent Ideas, who I will introduce properly at the end of my 10-minute presentation. We also have Hetty doing all the techie bits and receiving your questions in the background, and she's the Wild Communities officer. So some of you may have met Hetty before. And obviously we are from Devon Wildlife Trust. This is our first event of our 2023 winter webinar series. And same as last year, we're focusing on topics to help empower community action for nature. So the topics really do come from you. So topics that are based on conversations we've been having with communities across Devon. So really hope this session will be useful, but we do welcome any feedback or ideas for future events that you'd like to see. Before I delve into the presentation, as I mentioned a moment ago, we have a Zoom poll question that I'd appreciate you to answer. So the question is, are you currently involved with a community group / project? So not currently involved. I would like to set something up, but haven't started. I'd like to set something up or be involved, but don't know where to start. I'm currently involved in a community group or project. So I'll just let you answer those for a second. So it looks like most of you are currently involved in a community group or project. And then about 27% of you would like to set something up or be involved, but haven't started yet. And then 13% would like to set something up, but don't know where to start. And then just one of you is not currently involved with anything. So a real mixture, actually. So thank you for answering that. Okay, so top tips for a community group. So this is going to be a very quick whistle-stop overview. It's a very quick step-by-step guide. We will be sending the slides out to you afterwards. So if you don't catch everything that I'm saying, it's okay. It's all on the slides. I will try and pause for breath, but I'm quite aware of time. So I'm going to try and sort of whip through it a little bit so you have a general idea. Because we basically want to allow plenty of time to hear from Gareth and his expertise on the different formats and structures that community groups can take, and kind of delving into that a bit more. So why start a community group in the first place? So a lot of you probably have already experienced this, starting a group of projects to bring people together for a common cause. It can strengthen community connections. It's great to make friends as well. It's great to share skills and experience and expertise and your time, actually, which are often the resources that groups and projects really need. It can build collective power when you're within your community as well, which is really important. And what you're doing can also inspire other communities to take action, or individuals in your community to take action. There's probably other things, but I would say those are the main kind of thrusts of your motivation to start in a group or project. So step one, getting started. So the first things first is really gathering people together and sharing ideas and having a discussion and find out, what your community wants. Is there something missing in your community? Is there a real kind of cause in your community that you really want to focus on? So, what is your vision? What difference do you want to make in your community? What skills and experience do you have in your group to start off with? Who holds the power? Who holds the influence and authority in your community? Can you get them on board with you? Have you got any contacts that could help move things forward a bit quicker? How well connected are you and other people in the group? And and then it's sort of deciding, once you've got that vision, what's the first step really to making that happen, and having a consensus about that really, and a consensus about what you actually want to focus on is really, really important. So step 2, getting organised. So once you've got all your group together, and you've got your idea and you've got your cause, and you really want to turn your ideas into action, you might decide that actually you need a group format. So you might need to formalize your group. Are there other existing groups that actually you could just collaborate with instead, or look to them and replicate their structure even? What's your group name? What are your aims? So going back to that vision part, do you plan to write a constitution? And most formal groups will need a constitution, and Gareth will talk more about constitutions. But basically it means the sort of aims and objectives of your group, what you want to do. And how often will you meet? Will you run AGM and have voting and things like that? Will there be positions in your group? So secretary, chair, treasurer, other membership, other positions like a social media guru or something. So just thinking about pulling on those skills really and expertise, and perhaps formalizing what you're doing. And then it's kind of, looking wider than the core group of people that you've pulled together initially. So really gathering more people to maximize your capacity, your skills, experience, and ideas. So one of the important ways is to promote what you're doing, and promote it in different ways. Even if it's just at the concept stage, communicate that out to the people that are in your community. Think about offering flexibility, and flexibility of involvement. Sometimes people are really time strapped, but they might be willing to just an hour here or there. Perhaps arrange taster activities to really make that community cohesive. Think about being inclusive. So making sure that you're actually reaching out to everyone in the community, and trying not to accidentally exclude anyone. For instance, through the times that you're having meetings and things like that, make it really flexible and and different, I suppose. Really mix it up so lots of people can get involved. And making sure that everyone has a voice, and that everyone can feed into the project or the group, into the decision making and the ideas. So everyone's voice is heard. That's really important, so people really feel like they're taking ownership of things. And then wider than your group, can you think about working with others, connecting with other community groups or organisations, perhaps your local council, things like that as well. Step 4, staying safe. So making sure you're keeping everyone safe during your project and whilst your group is in existence. But really important things to consider. I guess that the drier subjects, but they really are foundational to really good governance of a group. So what insurance do you need? Who's responsible for this? Who should carry out risk assessments, and where are these going to be kept so everyone can see them? Do you need to think about first aiders? You probably need to think about safeguarding, and this isn't just to do with children. It's about protecting everyone from harm, abuse, and neglect. So children, young people, and particularly vulnerable adults. It's a collective responsibility, whether you're in a group or not. So just thinking about that really, and actually just on that point, if anyone's interested, if there's enough interest, we may well run some safeguarding training for communities perhaps next year sometime. So do let us know in the chat if you'd be interested in that. And then things to do with data protection, otherwise known as GDPR. How are you going to keep people's data safe? If you've got an email list, how are you going to store that responsibly? So lots to think about there, and that is really as a whistle-stop tour with that, but really important to be mindful of those things and think about it. Step 5, funding. So you've got your idea, you've got your people, you've got your skills. You might need now some resource to really get that project going. At that point, you may need a bank account because, if you need a grant, then that needs to be paid into a bank account. There are lots of banks that do have accounts for groups. Are you going to apply for grants? Are you confident in that? Do you need help? We have a group membership to raise funds that way, or will you just do fundraising activities in your community, or have a Kickstarter or crowdfunder or something like that? Is there any support from local council or even businesses in your local area? Just on that note, the Wilder Communities team, we ran a funding webinar last year, which was Amanda, our fundraising manager at Devon Wildlife Trust. She led that webinar. That's on our web pages. We also have funding pages that specifically telling you what funding grants are out there for community groups. So do have a look at the Wilder Communities funding pages, and on that page you'll see the webinar embedded in that page. Hetty's going to put the link to those pages in the chat, so hopefully that will be useful to you. Step 6, maintaining momentum. So yeah, making sure that you're keeping up promotion of what you're doing, keeping things accessible, making sure that you're reflecting and listening to what's going on in your community and how people are responding to it. Have incentives like cake, and most importantly, have fun and celebrate your achievements as well. Step 7, and this is totally optional, but you've done your organising and project, and you've done your wonderful project. You may be applicable to apply for our Wilder Communities Award, which is launching this month. Just a little bit of a plug for it. So do keep an eye on Devon Wildlife Trust web pages and social media. It might be something that actually gives you ideas for actually further projects when you look at the application form, but we welcome all levels of groups to apply for that. So that was a very whistle-stop tour. The main thing is, don't overthink these things. I think start small, have that enthusiasm, get those people together, and just expand as you feel you need to, really. There's some other places where you can go for help. So Devon Wildlife Trust web pages, the Next Door Nature Resource Hub, Community Action Groups Devon, and the National Council for Voluntary Organisations. We'll put all those links in the follow-up email, so don't worry about writing all that down. That's it from me. If you've got any questions or would like some support or help from Devon Wildlife Trust, then do email wildercommunities@devonwildlifetrust.org. That will go to myself and Hetty. But that's the whistle-stop tour. The main person tonight, though, is Gareth. And we are really pleased to welcome Gareth here tonight. He's the co-founder of Iridescent Ideas and has 30 years experience of working with social enterprise, voluntary, public and private sectors. He's worked at a strategic level with national organisations and at a grassroots level, providing business support and funding advice on a diverse range of subjects and themes. Gareth led the bid that saw Plymouth become the UK's first social enterprise city and writes regularly on social enterprise themes for various publications. And he is director of a local social enterprise network. So he'll be providing his professional insight tonight on the pros and cons of different legal structures of community group types to help you choose how best to formulate your group. So really, it's over to you, Gareth. Please feel free to pick Gareth's brains tonight because he has a wealth of experience. So I shall stop sharing, Gareth, and you can share your screen.
Fantastic. Thanks for that introduction, Katie. Yeah, and good evening, everyone. Really nice to be here. It's really fantastic. So this came out of a session that I ran at South Brent Village Hall. I think Hetty came, and we've started to we work based in Plymouth. My business, Iridescent Ideas CIC, we're a community interest company based in Plymouth, but we cover the whole of the sort of southwest and further afield now on with Zoom and webinars and things like that. Nice to see some. I've got a couple of people here that I know. Hi, Rashani. Hope things are okay, and probably some others that I might have met over the course of the last few years. Just to kind of a little bit more on my business, Iridescent Ideas. So we're a CIC. We've been based in Plymouth for just over 12 years. we start from a point of view of trying to create a greener, fairer, better, more socially enterprising world. That's our vision. That's what we're trying to create. And what we do to do that is we provide business advice. And we do a lot of work around legal structures, people forming community groups. We've set up scores of CICs and charities and community benefit societies and helped unincorporated groups. And I'm going to talk about those as we go through. We've only got about sort of 40 minutes. It's a big topic. But yeah, and I've, you know, I'm a bit of a governance geek. So there you go. That's for my sins. I love all this sort of stuff. If you I'm trying to make governance and legal structures fun, which is quite hard. It's quite a dry subject, but as Katie mentioned, it's really important to get right. And there's lots of different options. And I think the key thing, I think Katie said at the end, is don't overthink it. You've got to get out and do stuff, do this. I'm a big fan of the just do it approach. You can always amend things, change things. If you get things slightly, if it's not working, then you can move on. But it's good to sort of go into these things with your eyes wide open, thinking about the pros and cons of different types of structures and things like that. A couple of other things for me is, so yeah, I mean, there's a bit of a Q&A, so you can, if you've got some questions you want to hold to the end, that's great. If you've got a really burning question about something I say, please put your hand up or stick it in the chat and we'll take it as we go. I mean, I'd like to get some discussion going as we go as well, if we can, if that's okay. So I'm gonna, if you want to share my screen, I'm just gonna start. I think I've already started on a little bit of this. So yeah, this is all about starting something good. So I think you're all here, you're all involved in community groups, or you're thinking about setting up community groups or doing some great work in your communities. And I'd love to find out more about that, actually, and as we go. So I'm going to be talking about, yeah, some of those details of what different legal structures there are, a little bit on governance and some of the key things. I mean, Katie's mentioned quite a lot of that already, but I'll dig into a little bit of that. We'll look at some examples. And we'll talk about the sort of the pros and cons, and also look at some practical steps. So if you do after today want to say, I really want to start a community interest company or a charity or whatever, we'll look at some really practical steps to help you along the way. So that's what we're going to talk about. I hope that's what you all signed up for. So first of all, I want you to do a bit of work for yourselves. I want you to put you into smaller breakout groups, about 3 or 4 people, or 4 people if we can. Just have a chat amongst yourselves about the kind of legal structures you're considering if you're thinking about it. If you've already got a legal structure, is it working? What are the pros and cons of the structures you're already working with? And then think about a couple of big questions that you've got that you can feed back at the end. And I'll ask each group just very quickly in sort of like 20 seconds to feedback just to their discussions in a big question. And then that'll help me steer my presentation. So, okay, right. I'm going to share my screen and just going to go back to a few really first principles about this legal structure stuff before we delve into the depths of pros and cons. I think, and Katie's touched on this, some of the most important things are it's got to be appropriate for what you're trying to do. And that sounds really blindingly obvious, but and it's going to be driven by what sort of income streams you're going to generate, what kind of business you want to do, who owns it. That's a really important point. As Katie mentioned, who has influence, the power, what sort of structure, how formal you want. And someone mentioned not too formal, but particularly the route of income. If you're going to be very, very reliant on grants, then it pushes you down a certain route. If you're going to be very, very reliant, you're going to be much more commercial and free to trade, that pushes you down another route. If you want to be very much community owned and raise money in the community for a community shop, that might push you down a different route. So it's got to be appropriate for that underlying purpose that Katie mentioned, the vision and purpose. Now, I think on the whole, we're talking about structures that have got some sort of enshrined social, environmental, and or community objectives. So all the structures we're going to look at are kind of have that in their DNA, if you like. So that's really important. These are not private companies for private gain. There is a degree in some social enterprise models where private individuals can get benefit, but it's usually capped at a certain rate. But the real focus is on community, social, environmental objectives. So that's a really important point to get out. I mentioned the social enterprise idea. That usually in all these projects and different types of models, we see 3 very key features, and I call it a triple lock. So there's a mission lock. There's something that's encoding your mission in the governance, in a constitution or the articles of the company, which tells the world what you're trying to do. What is your mission? What is your purpose? What are your objectives? And that's written at a very high level, very strategic, sort of overarching level. Particularly if you're a charity, it's very, very sort of codified in a very certain way. There's also usually a lock on the profits. So there's a specific legal block that says, profits must be used to further the mission. Some say they can't pay any dividends. Some say, so that's the shareholders or profit. Some say that payments to directors can be made. Some say they can't. And we'll look into that in a bit more depth. So, but generally speaking, the majority of profits are kept in the business for that social purpose. And the third key feature is an asset lock. And what that means is that the assets that the company owns, so property, fixed assets, vehicles, materials, tools, have to be kept for that social purpose. And if the group was to close down, the assets would be sent off to another similar charity or similar organization, usually also asset locked. So they're the three kind of key things you want to look for in a governance. And all the structures we talk about pretty much have those enshrined in them, with the exception of unincorporated groups, which I'll discuss because you need to write a little bit more in those. Yeah, please put any burning questions in the chat, and please put, if you've got anything really burning, put your hand up. There's a couple of things coming up. Rashani wants to learn about unincorporated. Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about liabilities in a sec. Another thing to think about is this idea about there are key trigger points as you grow and as you move through your life as a group. And you might start very informal, just a few people, and you might decide, okay, this is working really well, but we do want to go for grant funding. Usually grant funders need to see a bank account and a constitution of some kind. So that means, okay, we do need to formalize a bit, but it's still very light touch and very, pretty informal. You might then want to go and employ people, and that might incur more risk, incur more money. And typically as you grow and get more money in, it tends to mean you've got to go down the route of becoming more formalized. And the classic journey is a couple of people with a bright idea, becoming a community group association, moving into, say, a more regulated form like a CIC or a charity. Yeah, if you get down the route of kind of going for bigger contracts or getting buildings, it might mean you want to protect yourself around your liabilities and things like that. So that's a really important point to think about. And another thing to think about, I think Katie sort of started to mention some of these, is there are lots of different juggling balls in the air that are coming into this filter that you've got to make a decision on. And I'm here to help you with that. And Katie and her team are here to help you with some of this. But there are things like, how are we going to pay people? Who owns this business? What do we think about income? Are we happy to pay taxes? Or we've got to be tax free because we can't afford to, we're going to work on very tight margins. What's going to happen to grants? Are we going to be reliant on grants? Are we going to get money in from earning money or donations? All these things, and are juggling around, and you've got to try and work a path through that to make a decision. So bear those thoughts in mind. I think the big ones for me are certainly ownership and control. Who owns this business? How is it a small group of people? Is it a wide community group? That's a really important one. What's the income model? Is it grants? Is it trading? Is it a mixture? Is it donations? And they're some of the two very important key features that you want to think about. So the first decision to make is, do you want to be incorporated or unincorporated? So what that means is an incorporated structure is where it's a legal entity in its own right. It's like another person in the room, and it's typically a company, a community interest company, or an incorporated charity of some kind. So it's a corporate entity, and it's has a separate identity, and that does provide some protection for liabilities. But there's a but coming in a minute for that. The other more simple option is an unincorporated group. So this is just a group of people. It doesn't have really its own legal identity. I mean, it have a name on the top of its constitution, but it's not in its own right a legal entity, and it's usually seen as just a group or association, and the management committee or the trustees of that group are the ones who have the liability and the risk. And the pros and cons of those two things are, so the incorporated structures can hold assets in the name of the company, whereas in an unincorporated, it's held in the name of the trustees or the committee. So that's a common issue, particularly if you want to get property. An incorporated structure has limited liability, usually £1. That's quite a a big thing for people. It does provide a bit more certainty. You get a company number, you get a registered charity number, you get a sort of a statement to the world. You can say, look, we're a robust, more structure. It does have this personality, gives a sense of robustness. But the downsides of it compared to a simple community group is it does cost money to set up. Depending on the structure you choose, it takes quite a lot of time. I mean, community benefit societies can cost upwards of £700,000, whereas CIC's usually cheaper, but this takes time. You once you incorporate, then you've got regulatory duties, you've got accountancy duties, you've got the cost to employ an accountant. Usually, it just steps up. Someone mentioned about the thing about becoming formal. That formalization usually costs money. So you have to put that into your budgets. Budget £1,000 for accountancy right at the beginning, or £500. So you can, and then apportion that to your relevant funding bids. Budget for your insurance. Budget for the time that's going to take to do your annual reports if you're a CIC or a charity. There is more regulation. There is more disclosure and scrutiny. Whereas if you're unincorporated, you're not regulated really by anyone. You can do pretty much what you like. You just have to keep a very simple income outgoing spreadsheet for your accounts. If you make a significant profit, you might have to register for tax, but hold that thought. So that's a key thing. And for many of you, it sounds like that small unincorporated group might be a really good first step, because it's really nice and simple. It's light touch. It's just a small group of people getting together, signing the constitution, getting a bank account, and that's what many people start off. I'm a member of, Katie mentioned, the Social Enterprise Network in Plymouth. We started as an unincorporated group with 20 members and created that entity, which ran for 3 or 4 years. It eventually decided to become a community interest company. That was our journey. But I usually advise start with a small community group, because it does put some things on paper. The but there is that thing about liability. There is a risk that the management committee of an unincorporated group do have the liabilities. And again, the flip side of that is, if you manage it well with good governance and common sense decision making, you're going to be fine. If you don't enter into massive debts and massive contracts, if there's a risk that you might be personally liable, I suppose, if you exercise good, reasonable judgment, you should be fine. So let's delve into we've got 10-15 minutes to talk about the pros and cons of these specific structures. Here are some of the most common ones: community interest companies, or CICs, or KICs they're called. Registered societies, so community benefit societies, mutuals, cooperatives. Standard companies, different types of charity, co-ops and mutuals can choose any one of these any one of these structures. Social enterprises can choose different structures. I've put PLC there. There are some, but it's very few. And that unincorporated model we talked about. And then, so I'm going to talk about CICs first. This is it's become quite a common model. Been around since 2005. I think the last count, there was something like 35,000 or over 30,000 CICs now in the country. Actually, Devon and Cornwall have some of the highest rates of CIC startup in the country, which is quite interesting. So a CIC is a company. It's registered with Companies House. It has 2 very important features. One is it has to exist for community purpose. So it has to pass what's called a community interest test. And that's regulated by the CIC regulator. And they're looking at, is what you're doing in the interest of the community? But it's a very light touch test. It's really simple to pass compared to, say, charity. And it has an asset lock. And as I mentioned, assets have to be kept for social purpose. If it closes down, assets are given to another similar organisation. So they're the key features of a CIC. There are a couple of different types of CICs: limited by shares or limited by guarantee. I won't go into great depth on that now, and you can pick up in the Q&A if you really want to know. But one is a bit like Dragon's Den, owned by shareholders. That's what Iridescent Ideas is. One is you give a guarantee of a notional sum, £1. A group of people come together with as guarantors. So my social enterprise network, we have member guarantors like that. Great thing about CICs is they're really quick and easy to set up. They can pay the directors and they can pay the owners, which is a really important point, because charities have a struggle with that. The regulation is light touch, simple report every year, and they have much more freedom to trade than, say, a charity. So really, really good, robust structure, and it's quick and easy and gets you going, and it provides quite a lot of entrepreneurial options for you, and particularly that thing about paying yourselves. The big downside, though, is that it doesn't get the tax breaks that charity gets. So you will have to pay corporation tax, business rates if you have to pay them. You don't get gift aid on donations. It's quite hard to donate to a CIC. It can be done, but it's tricky. And also, there are many grant funders that don't fund CICs. There are some that do and some that don't, and you've got to read the small print. If you're going to be absolutely reliant on grants, think really hard about this, because it's going to close some doors to grant funding for you. But CIC is great, simple structure. I've run a CIC for 12 years. I've been involved in directorships of several. I think it's a really fantastic, robust, strong model, and it does what it says on the tin. It's a community, it's a company acting in the interest of the community. It's become quite well known. To set one up, there is a process to follow. I'm not going to go through that now, but it's quite straightforward. The CIC 36 is a really simple document with a few bullet points, and there's a process online to go through. If you want to go down that route, I'll probably strongly advise get back in touch with Katie or myself to go into that in much more depth. We can guide you through that process. £27, nice and simple. So then there's charities. Now, there are lots of different types of charities. There's a charitable company, charitable trusts, charitable associations, and a new one, which is called a charitable incorporated organisation, or relatively new, CIO. I'll talk about that in a sec. So a key feature of a charity is that it must exist for charitable purpose, and it must show public benefit in what it does. So what does that even mean? Well, a charitable purpose is really quite strictly defined. There are 13 charitable purposes, things like relief of poverty, conservation, promotion of education, recreation, sort of conservation and wildlife and environmental causes are covered in there. But also it has to have public benefit. So what that means is it's got to be clear what the benefit is, and it's got to be enough people that are benefiting from that to pass. So if it was a very, very small group of people that were benefiting, it wouldn't be public enough. I wouldn't worry. Most of you probably don't have to worry about that, but there are some that get turned down for lack of public benefit. Big pros and cons of charities are people just understand them. I mean, if you say I'm going to donate to charity, people think it's a good thing, don't they? You don't really. Do you ever go and fill your car up with petrol, and there's a thing that says donate 25p to charity? I don't know about you. I press the button, and I don't really see where the money goes. I sort of, I just think I should do it, and then it's kind of a good thing. So people understand charities, and there is some skepticism sometimes about charities, but on the whole, charities enjoy a really strong sort of brand in the UK of public trust and understanding. Definitely more funding options. There are trusts and foundations, thousands of them, that will only fund charities. And all those tax benefits I mentioned, gift aid on donations, corporation tax, capital gains exemptions, VAT, some VAT exemptions. It's brilliant in one level. Downside of charities, though, are more restricted about trading. So if you're selling a service, you have to be quite careful about how you do that. It can be done, but you have to consider, is it in the pursuit of the charitable purpose? Is it secondary? Is it ancillary? Does it need to be in a trading arm? It makes it more complicated than, say, a CIC. Another issue is about the trustees not being paid. So if you are quite entrepreneurial and you want to set up a social enterprise, you might want to be paid to do that. If you want to be a charity, if you want to be paid, you've got to be the manager. So you've got to then get trustees that are above you, and the trustees hold you to account. And in theory, you could be sacked from your own organisation. It's very rare. Again, if you do good work, you're probably all right. But it's the key thing to where you put yourself in that structure can be quite hard if it's quite an individual sort of social entrepreneurial business as opposed to a community group. They are more heavily regulated for all those tax benefits than say CICs. And they have specific financial duties and financial reporting and more sort of stringent reports. And they're a little bit more difficult for social entrepreneurs, but they can be a brilliant model if it's right for you and your group and what you want to do. And CIOs are fairly new, and I probably advise, if you're thinking of charity and registering a charity, is look at this model quite strongly. Basically, what it means is it creates an incorporated organisation, but you only have one regulator, which is the Charity Commission. In the old days, you had to be registered as a company and a charity and report to both. So you had two regulators. Now you just have one. So it's much easier. And you can also register without any income. So you can just register a charity and get going, which is quite good. So it reduces some of the bureaucracy that charitable companies and other charities might have. Yeah, just to something to think about. I think my main advice is, unless you're very, very small and you're going to be a charitable association, which is effectively an unincorporated charity, probably go for a CIO, which is becoming more popular these days. Community benefit societies were mentioned. Not many people have talked about it, but it's quite a popular model because it is really good for community assets and community energy and community shops and community pubs. People get together to buy the community pub, and they raise money in the community through this sort of share finance, community shares. It's a brilliant model if it's very, very community minded. In Plymouth, we've got Plymouth Energy Community, and there's Plymouth energy communities across Devon. They're all often community benefit society models, slightly differently regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, not by, say, Charity Commission or CIC regulator, but they are incorporated. They usually have an asset lock, and they have that ability to raise money in the public domain through shares. You can also get charity exemptions on some of these, which is really great, because then you get the charity tax breaks with slightly less of the headaches of a really super normal charity. You become what's called an exempt charity. And you also have this idea about democracy at the heart of it. It's one member, one vote, regardless of the amount of money you've put in, or you can. It's very democratic, but then that brings potentially some conflicts. Something to think about: managing democracy, managing the membership. So there's one in Plymouth that had like 500 members. It's got to get 50 people at any meeting to make a decision. That being quora, it's quite hard to have enough people in the meeting to make it work. They can cost more to set up. And if you do raise money in the public domain, there are quite a lot of restrictions on how they operate. So you've got to be careful about that. So that's a key thing. Just a couple of examples before I sort of stop, and then we can open it up for questions. Eden in Cornwall, and that's a charity with a trading arm. So the trading arm runs Eden and makes all the money. All the profits go back to the core charity. Core charity kind of owns it and owns the sort of core vision of it. But the charity, the trading arm, is a real commercial entity that drives all the merchandise and ticket sales and all that sort of stuff. But very strongly associated with the social and environmental causes, and quite a big business. Plymouth Energy Community Benefit Society originally now has a charitable trust in there, and other structures as well. My business, we're a CIC limited by shares, so it's a little bit unusual. 2 shareholders, £1 shareholding each. That does give us the ability to pay some small dividends, but we've made profits, but we've chosen to keep the money in the business. Compared to Smart Savings, a CIC based in Cornwall, that's a small organisation that supports people around ethical finance, and training people to be financially savvy. That's a CIC limited by guarantee, so it has guarantors. So the guarantors and the shareholders are the same sort of the owners, effectively. Same principles. Don't forget, you've got this idea about owners, and then you've got directors. And the directors run the company on behalf of the owners. Often they're the same people, but not always. Cooperatives, John Lewis Mutual, owned by its employees. Lots of different structures there. I'm going to stop the share there. Unincorporated groups are set up really simply with just a simple constitution. Katie mentioned it. It's like usually 1 page or 2 pages of rules, sets out the purpose, sets out how you elect, say, the officers at the AGM, annual general meeting, and what happens to money, what happens if you close down, usually signed by the first 3 people. And then that's it, really. You can get up and running and go and get a bank account with that simple constitution. So that's usually the very, very first step. I'm conscious of time. I've whistled through that. I hope I haven't spoken too quickly. It's a lot to consider, a lot to take in. I've got some stuff on governance in the slides I can send you about things like the more detailed duties of a trustee and a director. There are quite legal, specific things you've got to be careful of there. It's all common sense, manage the money well, abide by the law, health and safety, employing staff properly, it's all that sort of stuff there. Insuring your company, managing the money is the big one. Show me the money, follow the money, manage the money well. You'll be all right. Use the money for charitable purposes. Use the money for your core organizational purposes is usually kind of the golden rule here. So I've covered some of the differences between CICs and charities, which I think was one of the questions. I've covered a bit about guarantee shares. Can talk more about that if you want. Talked a bit about going from a informal to a formal structure. Large funding. So obvious ones are national lottery type funding. So Heritage Lottery, National Lottery Charities, the National Lottery Community Fund. What's it called now? I can't remember. The National Lottery Community Fund. Sports England, Arts Council if you're quite creative. There are lots of trusts and foundations that have got quite big chunks of money. There are probably funding searches that people can do in and around to support you on some of that. There's a thing called Awards for All, which is the lottery first sort of level, which is going up to 20,000 in November. 20 grand's quite a nice chunk. Devon Community Foundation tends to be a bit smaller, £2 to £10,000 maybe. Yeah, and probably Katie's already got a list. I think she started to give you a few ideas there for funding. So yeah, I'm going to pause there. I want to throw it open to questions. I hope I haven't bewildered and befuddled you with all the different options of legal structures. Hope it's making sense. Please tell me what's coming up for you from that list of questions.
Whilst people are having a think of questions, Gareth, I might kick one off, which is, can you change group structure later down the line if you set up in one format and then you decide to change? So I think that's probably something that might be quite interesting to know.
Yes, you can. Usually, there's usually so, for example, if you start as a community group with just that constitution unincorporated, then you can change to become a more regulated structure like a CIC or a charity or a community benefit society. Let's say you chose CIC. If you choose a CIC and you decide after 6 months or a year it's really not working for you, you can convert a CIC to a charity or to a community benefit society. Then you could become. There are some processes to follow there. It's quite bureaucratic, but it can be done. What you can't do then, though, is convert back from a charity to a CIC. So once you start down that route, charities at one end is the kind of purest form, if you like. This end is more unincorporated or straightforward private companies. So you can convert a private company to a CIC and to a charity, but you can't go back down towards being completely private. So usually it's that route. But yes, you can. And also the other option is, if it's really not working, close it down, start again. That is an option, but it's ideally not great because it costs a bit of money and it takes time and it's bureaucratic. But yeah.
I'm going to sort of paraphrase a kind of comment/question in the chat. So I guess the question is kind of, is insurance enough to offset some of the liability insurances with an unincorporated association?
It's a really good question. Sort of, but not entirely. And it depends on how you run it. So you can get what's called indemnity insurance or trustees indemnity insurance. And what that usually provides is insurance to provide you to cover the legal costs if you entered into any challenges. So it doesn't completely protect against the liability, because if you're still found liable, you still have to pay it, but it will provide the legal costs to fight that claim. But if you act negligently as a trustee or as an organizational management committee member, if you're negligent in your duties, then that insurance may be nullified. So again, it goes back to this thing about good governance and common sense. So yeah, that is the big risk with unincorporated groups, is worry about liability. But I have to ask the question, what is the real risk? What is the real liability here? It'll say, the classic one is, if you entered into a rental agreement for 5 years at £10,000 a year and then closed down after a year, you're liable for £40,000 of rent. So yeah, that's really bad. But would you really enter into that contract? So just kind of exercise some real common sense around the finances. If you manage, managing staff, if you manage staff well and you do good recruitment, good processes, you should be okay. So there's always that thing. And also, it's not in really anyone's interest to really sort of like really pursue the trustees of a small group for thousands and thousands of pounds. It's a really bad message. So a lot of people, it's incredibly rare. I've in 30 years of working in the sector, I've not known of any trustees ever be pursued for personal liability like that. And it must happen at some cases, but I've never seen it happen. Charities are spending millions of pounds, and charities go bust all the time. You must have seen the big news stories. But it's very highly rare that creditors go after individuals. Yeah, Roshani, you got a question?
Yeah, just to add to that, thank you so much for that really in-depth response. With regards to insurance brokers, do they tend to maybe try and raise their premiums with unincorporated, with constitutional groups?
I guess if the insurer felt there was a higher risk, then yeah, the insurer is going to raise their premium. I mean, most small community groups using basic public liability insurance, if it's fairly straightforward, like events and activities and community work, I don't think the premiums are going to be massive. I mean, it might be £200-300. When I started my business, it was £200 giving business advice. I've got to have indemnity insurance for giving professional advice, which is a bit extra. Most community groups, I mean, if you're running a building, then you got more buildings and contents insurance, and the roof might fall in. It's a bit more risky, isn't it? So yeah, so as the risk increases, the insurance premium will increase. But I think if in my experience, the premiums are fair. You can shop around, use comparison sites. There are some specific ones like ecclesiastical and AQ Men. There's a few others that specialize in insuring charities and social enterprises. They're often not the cheapest, because they're specialists, but they are sometimes social enterprises themselves, which is really nice. So yeah, there's so shop around for insurance, get 2 or 3 quotes, and yeah, I mean, again, back to your setup state. If you're in that setup phase as a business, thinking about your budget for the year, okay, what do I need to cover my costs? I need to pay for my staff, my salaries. I need to pay for my rent, my insurance, my accounts. There's a whole load of costs you've got to find money for before you can start doing really good work. IT, things like that. So that's got to be baked into your budgets and your funding bids from day one, really. So think about these insurance costs really early stages, and accountancy particularly.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a question there about different trustees. What are the responsibilities and who will decide? Okay, I'm going to share my screen because I've got a very specific slide which should help that. Can you all see that jigsaw slide? This is a really lovely, simple description of what are the duties of a trustee. 6 very overarching trustee duties. You can go to the Charity Commission site and dig into these with a bit more detail. But if you look at those things, isn't that all really commonsensical? Complying with the law and the governing document, carrying out the purposes for public benefit, act in the best interests, manage the resources responsibly, act with reasonable care and skill, ensure you're accountable. So they are the 6 core duties of a trustee. As a director of a company, it's a CIC, very similar, slightly differently worded. Again, promoting the success of the company, conflicts of interest, reasonable care and skill, declaring interest. So the directors of a company have very similar duties. And the management committee members of a small community group would be considered the equivalent of the directors or the trustees. Are there different ways to decide who will be the trustees? Not really. I mean, usually the management committee are considered to be the trustees. So trustees is a word you usually associate with charities. Just a little aside here is you can have what's called a very small charity under £5,000 run as an unincorporated group. So if you're an unincorporated group with charitable aims under £5,000 of income, you can call yourself a small charity, but you don't have to register with the Charity Commission. So it's very, very light touch. You get the benefits of being a charity. Then you can call yourself a charity, but you're not registered with the Charity Commission. As soon as you hit £5,000 of income, then you do have to register and go and get a charity number. But let's say that small group had a management committee of 3 or 4 people, they would be considered the equivalent of the charity trustees. So whoever is on the management committee, that's usually elected at an annual general meeting or appointed at the first setting up of the business. So it's for you to decide, really, simply put. It's for you to decide who are the management committee, who is putting their name on the line, being a director and being the trustee and taking responsibility. I think Katie mentioned it, who's in control, who has influence, who wants to put their hand up and say, yeah, I will kind of accept that responsibility. I mean, I'm a trustee, a director of quite a few different firms. I think it's actually quite a privilege to be asked to do it. And I take that responsibility seriously. And I make sure I go to those meetings and I make sure I ask the right questions and I make sure, well, I try to. So I think it's a fantastic public service thing that we all, it's a beautiful thing in the world of voluntary work in Britain. I think this option to become trustees, it helps the world become a better place, doesn't it? I think there's something quite powerful about and profound about that idea of trusteeship, which I think is really good. Yeah, Josh, you've got a question.
Yeah, hi Gareth. Just clarifying, just for this on liability, really. So just thinking, like, for the main purposes of kind of I just sort of don't want to generalize, but just sort of thinking most people here with the Wildlife Trust kind of spin on it would be kind of setting up their organization to sort of go out maybe and do like little voluntary tasks like planting trees, for example. So are we talking liability just in terms of financial things for the whole charity, or would you potentially be factoring in liability for, say, somebody falling over or hurting themselves with a spade or something like that when they're out tree planting?
Yeah, so one of it is, I mean, part of it is basic financial liability, like, managing the money and going into contracts, and, do you owe your creditors, who do you owe money to, and can you pay those creditors back? So making sure you don't trade or you don't operate insolvently. If you knowingly go and spend some money, enter into a contract knowing you're insolvent, that's bad. On the liability bit, about the other bit about tripping over and hurting yourself with a spade, I mean, yeah, I suppose that's where you have public liability insurance, wouldn't you? You'd have that, that will be insured. If you didn't do a risk assessment and you acted negligently and someone hurt themselves and they sued you, I guess, yeah, there is a risk there that you are liable. But if you do good risk assessments, you manage those activities well, you take care of people and you look after people properly, and you have good first aid practices, and you go to the Katie safeguarding and first aid courses, I think you'd probably be okay, as long as you're sensible there. But yeah, in theory, if I run an event and someone trips over a cable I've left lying about, my insurance hopefully will cover that. But if I've been negligent, there might be some difficult questions to answer about how that's run. That's my risk assessments. Yeah, Katie, you've got a point. I just want to answer that.
No, I've actually
Josh,
got a separate question.
Does that help answer? Oh, sorry, Katie. Josh, does that reasonably answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it just sounds like sort of as long as everything's sort of done with a common sense approach, then these things won't really happen anyway. So
yeah, and that sounds a bit flippant, doesn't it? It sounds a bit easy to say, common sense, and bad things do happen. You can't insure against every single risk, and you can't be so risk averse that nothing gets done.
Yeah,
that's the other thing. Is if you get too much obsessed by risk, and you have to do a 20-page risk assessment for planting a little tree, you kind of think, come on, guys, there's a balance to be struck here, isn't there, somewhere? And that's a judgment. And this is the thing about running a business or running a thing. It's a lot of it is about your judgment as a group of people. That's why we get a group of people with us, to help us form good judgments. Yeah. Sorry, Katie, go on.
That's okay. I've just got my own questions, actually, Gareth. What's the minimum number of people you need then to set up, say, a CIC or whatever it is? Because like you say, I see CICs pop up all the time. And the other question is, in your opinion, can you actually earn a living basically from running a CIC? Because I see him pop up all the time and I scratch my head and I think, are they earning a decent living, or actually are they having to work like another job to keep that going? Like, because I think you cannot do all this in a voluntary capacity, but wouldn't it be great if we could all actually earn a living whilst doing something that's socially, environmentally really beneficial? It's just a different type of economy, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my question.
I don't know of many CIC owners who are driving Ferraris and getting off the French Riviera every week.
No.
But there are loads of CICs, that do earn a living. I mean, I've always had this mantra, which was earn a good living and make the world a better place through social enterprise. I mean, that's why, and I've run my CIC for 12 years and it pays the bills. And we have most of our work is commercial contracts, and we have some grant funding in the mix. So yeah, absolutely, CICs can earn a living. The but there is, you've got to be able to run that business, make sales. You've got to be able to sell your work. You've got to be able to write funding bids, win contracts. So yeah, if you're, that's where the money's made, isn't it? You make money to pay your bills and pay your salaries yourself and others around you to create a great CIC. So yes, they can, but I think I'd be careful about assuming that social enterprise is a more sustainable model than, say, running a grant-based charity. Because if you're brilliant at writing funding bids and getting donations, you can get money that way, and you can earn a living running a charity. There's people who do that. So there's something about sales, which is a kind of horrible business word, but can you sell? And I think charities have to do it. They have to sell their work to the world to get donations, don't they? To use that word, sell. So, or businesses have to sell cups of coffee or sell sandwiches. You know, you've got to be able to sell that and market it and get people through the doors to buy your wares. But yes, absolutely, they can make money. There is a bit of a thing where a lot of people start a CIC, go and get a grant, run it for a year, pay some bills, and then they can't get another grant and it closes down. And that is, you know, a shame, really. That does happen. So, but yeah, so good financial management, good planning, good governance, good marketing, good business practices hopefully helps with that. The other question was about numbers. Right, that's a really interesting question. So you can set up a CIC entirely on your own as a sole director, sole shareholder, sole owner CIC. That can be done. I started mine with just two of us, me and my partner. The but there is, as you grow and develop, particularly if you do want to go for grant funding, most grant funders expect to see it usually at least 3 people on the board of directors, 3 unrelated people. And that also then goes into the bank account. The bank account is controlled by at least 2 unrelated people. So when my partner and I set up Iridescent, we eventually went for lottery funding. We had to get a 3rd person to come on board to be a sort of voluntary director. They weren't paid to start with. They were just there as a voluntary capacity, became a signatory, helped us out in that basis. He eventually did become a salaried member of the director and was paid. So 3 is a good number to aim for, because and also we've now got 4 directors, and it's brilliant. We've got 2 people that come to our meetings, ask great questions, provide loads of support, give us loads of great advice on marketing and finance and stuff where we got some gaps. So getting a committee of 3, 5 people can be brilliant. Obviously, you've got to manage that and all that. So yeah, usually 3 is a good number to aim for. You can do it with 1. If you're going to be completely commercial as a CIC and just charge people, you can do it on your own, because you just charge and you get people money in through the doors. Usually when grant funding comes in, they expect that little bit more governance. It just gives a sense of a more well-rounded organisation, I suppose. There's another question over. Did I see another question pop up? Or was it,
so I've got a couple of that have come through directly to me. I'm aware we're sort of running over on time, but obviously there's some great conversations going, and it's great to have your expertise. So if anyone needs to dash off, please do. But I might just read out those couple of questions, if that's okay. So there's one on what does the constitution mean exactly for an informal group?
Okay. So should I show you an example of the constitution? That might be the easy thing to do. Let me just dig one up. I'll share my screen. If you've not seen one before, this is what a constitution looks like. So usually it's 2 sides, small community group constitution. This sets out the name of the group, the purpose, so that really high level vision and mission that Katie mentioned right at the beginning, that it has a management committee, what it can do to deliver those purposes, usually, raise money, donations, do anything lawful to fulfill the purposes. Who can be members? So that could be wide in the community. It could be narrow. It could be just a small group of people. You might want to throw it open to the community. You might not. That's a question. The fact that you have this annual meeting to kind of elect or appoint the management committee, how it's run, the management committee meetings, how often, conflicts of interest, etc. Really important one about money and property. So this one says money must be used for the organisation's purposes, must keep accounts in a bank account. This one does allow for members of the committee to be paid. So you can be paid and enter into a contract. Other types of meetings, what happens if you close down, date, signed, that's it. So that's what a constitution looks like. Can be as simple as that. And that creates that simple community group. And then from that, you could go and get a bank account. Now, I say that as though it's easy. In my experience at the moment, banks are being really difficult. And it could take weeks and weeks and weeks. I've had some that have been spent 2 months and been turned down. I did one that took 8 weeks, endless to and froing between NatWest. Another one that actually went through really quickly with NatWest. So getting a bank account allows some time, because it can be quite challenging, and probably go to the bank that you bank with personally. And that's quite helpful. That's what a constitution looks like. So yeah.
That leads very nicely actually into the next question, which is, can you have a bank account and apply for funding grants as an unincorporated association, or is it better to set up as a small charity?
Yes, so you can get a bank account as a small unincorporated association and you can apply for funding, absolutely, as long as the purposes are good cause purposes. There's a word that a lot of funders use, which is something like they have to be philanthropic and benevolent. So as long as those purposes are clear and in the interest of the community or the environment, or they're broadly charitable, good causes, yes, you should be able to get grant funding. Some funders may ask you for a charity number. So then that means you probably do need to register as a charity. Some will say if you're a small charity under that £5,000 threshold, you can apply without a charity number because you're still effectively a charity. You're sort of regulated by the Charity Commission, even though you don't have that charity number, if that makes sense. So I'd always read the small print. Every fund is different. So for example, CICs, there are quite a few funders that say we will fund CICs. We only fund CICs where the project is broadly charitable. And to make it more complicated, they will only fund CICs that are limited by guarantee, not limited by shares. But some say we will fund shares, but not CIC. It's really complicated and really messy. Simple rule is limited by guarantee CICs are probably simpler for funding than CICs limited by shares. It's just a little bit more complicated around the ownership of those organisations. If you're going to be completely reliant on grants, I would strongly advise looking at the small charity route to start with and maybe becoming a charity. But it depends on you personally, what if you want to be paid and how that's going to work for you. You've got to work that bit out. Whereas a CIC is much better for that, but you don't get the tax breaks and you don't get the grant funding breaks. See, there's always payoffs, aren't there? There's like pros and cons of all, and you've got to decide what works for us. If it's very community minded and it's just a group of people and you don't expect to be paid, it's very voluntary, small charity probably is the easiest thing to do with that constitution type arrangement. Just it's so light touch. It's nice and simple.
Brilliant. So I think that's probably really all we've got time for. There are a couple of questions around sort of, have you got any links about where they can find more advice on the subject, and if it's possible to maybe have a copy of the Constitution template. So if those things are okay for you, Gareth, to send on afterwards, perhaps we can include those in the follow-up email, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to put quick things in the chat. I'm going to put my email address in there. I will send the slides, there's some other bits on the slides with some links on. I'll send a copy of that Constitution. I will also give you a link to. We've got some online courses, which are there's some online free resources. There's some that are £20, some that are £30, which gives some insight into CIC, social enterprises, setting up a community project, how to measure social impact, funding and finance, and a few others. So you can have a look at those if you want. There's some. If you're in the Plymouth travel to work area and you're lucky enough to be down this way, Ivy Bridge sort of way, Plimpton, Plymstock, we can give you free business advice. Elsewhere, unfortunately, we can't. But I think Katie's mentioned a few sort of sources of support that you can access. But yeah, get in touch. I mean, if you've got a burning question after today, drop me an email. Very happy to probably email and answer. Have a look at our online courses. There's some free resources there as well, like some guides to choosing a structure that are free. I'll send the links and the slides. And yeah, I suppose just very simply, finally from me, really nice to meet you all. I hope that's been useful. It can be quite daunting. Don't let that get in the way. If you've got a great idea and you're passionate about something in your community, just do it. You'll find a way through it. Your passion and the dedication works. Yeah, you've got to think about governance and management and all that stuff. Everyone has to. But, let's not kind of be so risk averse that we don't get out there and make the world a better place for our communities. Really get out there and do something really fantastic. The legal structure will fall into place. You get advice from people and it'll be fantastic. So please don't let that get in the way and do some great work in your communities.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gareth. And I'll just hand back to Katie.
Yeah, nothing more to add, really. I think Gareth, you really rounded that off, well. Just get out there, put your ideas into action, and don't overthink it, and just grow as you go along, really. Yeah, thank you so much, Gareth. Really, really interesting. obviously you've put in your email address there. Myself and Hetty can help with like the simpler things, like grant funding, ideas for that, or writing applications. We can support with that, and just even coming to have a look at your idea in your community, particularly if it's around nature and wildlife. In terms of the nitty gritty, more kind of incorporated and advice about that, then that's a Gareth thing, really. But yeah, we can do those initial sort of first steps that I was talking about at the beginning. Myself and Hetty can help a bit with that if you need any support. Hetty's put in the chat a link to our Wilder Communities e-news. I do recommend signing up to it, just because we put on there the latest funding opportunities, also stories from around Devon in terms of what other communities are doing, so getting inspiration from them, and things like the next webinars coming up, etc. So yeah, we find that communities really like the e-news. So yeah, that's it really. Thank you all so much for coming here tonight. We will send out an email with different links. Oh yes, thank you, Hetty. There is a quick poll question. If you could just fill it out before you go, just to see, we just want to know whether this session was useful for you. So please do answer it honestly, because we'll build on that going forward. So yes, thank you ever so much, everyone, and I hope you have a good rest of the evening. And thank you so much, Gareth. That was really, really, really good. Thank you.
So everyone, good luck. Nice to meet you all. Take care. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Hetty.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. See you again.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.